So this is a pretty solid question. Problem is by international law, blockade is an act of war. So if a country decides to blockade Russia's ports in the Baltic Sea or anywhere in the north, then they would be committing an act of war against Russia, to which Russia could respond, and then we would be in World War III because it'd likely have to be a NATO country doing it. The reality is we won't do something like that to avoid the potential uh, spiral of going into World War III. And the reason Russia is getting away with it is because even though they haven't officially declared war, they're in a warlike state with Ukraine. So executing a blockade of Ukrainian ports falls within the line of tactics one can use in a war. So, not that Russia really follows the rules, frankly, but to an extent, NATO nations do. So it would provide an excuse for Russia to do really terrible things to Baltic nations and others, and we would devolve into World War III if we were to try to blockade anything in the north, or really any Russian ports, because, like I said, blockade is considered an act of war. Now, there are alternatives where the UN could flag Egyptian or Japanese or non-NATO ships under the UN and then convince the Turkish that they're not in a warlike state, they're there for a humanitarian operations, and if Turkey would allow them to come through in a humanitarian capacity to escort grain ships, that's a potential way of doing it. The issue is, I don't think Russia would agree to that. Russia is using starvation as a bargaining chip. They're using it as blackmail, quite frankly, and they're not going to just allow an Egyptian or Japanese or Australian or whoever flagged naval ship to come into the Black Sea, tell Russia to get the hell out of the way. We're taking the grain out to get it to where it needs to go without them doing something. So we're kind of in a tough spot right now because the only ones that are capable of doing something in NATO will cause World War III. The only ones that are capable of doing something that aren't in NATO would more than likely face a direct challenge by the Russian Navy, meaning they probably will get into an engagement, and then potentially you see Japan or Australia or others at war, and that triggers additional security guarantees that the U.S. has with some of those, and it's just a very sticky situation. But we'll kind of keep an eye on it, and hopefully we can find a diplomatic resolution so people aren't starving to death.